We begin tonight with a Dear David letter to the Minister of Health. It begins, Aotearoa needs more midwives. It's also the name of a Facebook page established on Tuesday, which has gained so much attention. Messages were coming in at the rate of about one a minute for much of the day today. Some of the messages are from women expressing support for their midwives, but most are from midwives themselves who say they are overworked, underpaid, exhausted and are being driven to leave. They want David Clark to hear their stories and to consider the numbers. Here are some of the messages read by the midwives themselves.
Dear David, last week I drove 600 kilometres, filled my petrol tank 3 times, worked 66 hours in total and spent 2 nights away from my family. My average income for the past 2 months has been $308 a week, just over $7 an hour. I love my job, but I'm being forced to leave.
Dear David, as a new graduate midwife, I have made $667, excluding GST and tax, in the past 7 months. To survive, I do shifts at the local cafe where I get paid the same hourly rate as working in the hospital as a midwife.
Dear David, having supported a woman with an 18-week loss, I then raced downstairs to catch the baby of another client after a rapid labour. Those 2 babies were born within an hour of each other, and I cried all the way home.
Dear David, I've been a midwife for 17 years, and LMC for the majority. Initially, I could have a reasonable income with 40 clients per year, but now I need to have 55 for the same. My role has expanded to include a lot of screening as women have more complicated needs. Documentation demands have escalated phenomenally. To earn the same money, I have to work longer hours than ever before. I don't get sick pay, holiday pay, remuneration for working weekends, public holidays, or remuneration for being on call 24/7. I love my job, but would love you to support a government bid to increase funding to midwives.
Dear David, last week a client of mine was sent to another part of New Zealand because my local DHB was full to crisis point. Not only does this mean that I will no longer get paid for her birth cares, more importantly, it means that I do not get to support her and her whānau through this life-changing event.
So that's just some of the midwives who are participating in this Dear David action. The David, of course, is David Clark, the Minister of Health. We have a statement from him and we'll read it later. And he's going to join us to discuss these issues on Checkpoint next week. But we thought we'd look at some of the facts and put them before you. Midwives are paid $2,314.50 for all pregnancy, labour, birth and postpartum care. So they don't get paid per hour, they get paid per pregnancy effectively. That includes all antenatal and postpartum visits, petrol, clinical costs, the whole lot. The New Zealand College of Midwives has calculated that works out to about $7.23 an hour for rural midwives, less than half the minimum wage, and $12.40 for urban or city midwives. They're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Midwives are leaving either the workforce entirely or are heading overseas for better pay. And we have seen striking examples of the contracts midwives are being offered in Australia. At least 30 midwives have left the Waikato region in the last 6 months. Now, Cromwell midwife Charlie Ferris was one of the people who started all of this. In fact, she started the Facebook page herself out of sheer desperation. She told me via Skype what the crux of the issue is for her.
One is that we don't have enough midwives, and number 2 is we don't have enough money to take any time off for ourselves if we need it for sickness or just a bit of a break from work.
Charlie, can I just look at the issue of you being overworked? And can we use you as a specific example? When you say you're overworked, how many hours are you paid for each week?
That's a tricky one for us to put our finger on. There's no actual guideline around how many hours we would do, and because pregnancy and birth is so unpredictable, our hours could range from 30 to 100 in a week. I would say standard midwives would be happy with a 40-hour week. I think that would feel crazy to most midwives. But again, there are no specific guidelines on hours a week.
Okay, so if you look back over the last month or two and you divide the amount of hours you've actually worked by the amount of money you've been paid, what has your actual hourly rate been?
$7.40 an hour, which is less than half of minimum wage.
$7.40 an hour. You're not, sorry, that's actually forensically true.
Forensically true, yes. And I'm not happy when I read the emails my accountant sends me either.
So what are you going to do personally?
I'm quitting LMC midwifery. I am going to stay on. Obviously, I have to support the other midwives in my remote rural region of Central Otago, but my full-time job is going to have to be at the primary birthing unit, Charlotte Jean Maternity Hospital in Alexandra.
So you won't go on the road anymore?
Maybe one day, but right now I'm looking at being bankrupt by the end of the year if I continue as an LMC midwife. So
I just don't understand that. So you are out of pocket for going on the road. So how many times would you fill up your petrol tank in a normal week?
Well, it was 3 the last week, and this week is probably going to be 2 or 3 again.
And who pays for that?
That's me. That's out of my business expenses, but essentially out of my pocket.
So when you travel to go and see the mums you are looking after, you pay for your own petrol?
Yes.
Yeah. And your original hourly rate, setting aside the $7.40 you're actually earning, is what?
Well, $7.40 after business expenses, $7.40 in the hand.
And what are you paid before all your deductions?
It's around $2,300 for a first-time mum for all of pregnancy, birth and postnatal care. So that's from conception, say 5 weeks of pregnancy, until the baby's 4 to 6 weeks old. We don't have any increase in payment for complex pregnancies or more hours. So $2,300 for that entire module and for the entire journey.
And that doesn't matter how far you travel? So you're based in Cromwell?
Correct, yeah. So there are some allowances for rural, semi-rural and remote rural women, and that's paid only in the postnatal portion of the modules. So there's no recognition of that in pregnancy or for the birth.
And it doesn't, and you get no more if it's a highly complex pregnancy and you're visiting?
Yeah.
Right. So,
for example, I've got a mum at the moment who's needing weekly to fortnightly blood pressure checks. Normally I'd see her monthly, but I've been seeing her 2 to 4 times as much as my baseline rate would pay me, and there's no recognition for that. And I'm happy to do it. She's a beautiful woman and she needs the care, and I'm happy to provide it. I can find the time in my day, but I'm not getting paid to do that.
And how many women, midwives, are you hearing from who are telling similar stories?
I can't tell you the number of messages we've had since we launched the page on Tuesday. It's in the hundreds, 400 to 500 at the moment maybe, and the majority from midwives, some from women. And
at what rate are they coming in as we speak? So it's 1:30 on Friday afternoon. Are you hearing from people now?
We've had about a message a minute since around 8 this morning.
Wow.
So it's taken off big time.
And are people leaving the profession? Are people telling you explicitly that they can't do it any longer?
New Zealand, yes, we've got a world-class maternity system, but what we're seeing is midwives burning out, and they're underpaid, they're overworked, and it's a funding issue. The government is quite simply not putting enough money into our profession, and midwives are just having to leave, and they're dropping out of midwifery altogether. They might be taking early retirement if they can. They might be retraining or moving to Australia, which is much better pay rates for midwives. So it's going to be difficult.
How much better? How much better in Australia?
Well, we've had one example of a midwife saying she's taken a job in Aussie. I think it was 97 Aussie dollars a year, 97,000 Aussie dollars a year, and a whole lot of perks as well, free rent and equipment and car. And she was only expected to work 37.5 hours a week. So that's probably a good example of an Aussie contract. But we're not going to get those midwives back. They're going to go to Australia, they're going to enjoy the beautiful lifestyle over there, and we're not going to get them back to the New Zealand maternity system the way it stands at the moment.
So, dear David, the David is David Clark. Have you heard back from him yet?
No, not yet. And actually, we're not doing this for him to contact us. We're doing this to encourage him to lead the way in the 2018 budget. And he needs to hear us. He needs to know our stories. He needs to go in and make an informed decision when he's putting in whatever input he has into the 2018 budget. The flow-on effect, we hope, is that all other MPs are going to stand up and listen as well, because we want to get loud and we want to make noise.
Charlie Ferris, who is behind the Dear David campaign. Lots of feedback coming in already. And Gosh, this is an example of how society values the work of women, says one listener. I would have been lost without my midwives as a first-time mum. They're amazing for anyone who has given birth. They both know midwifery as real as it gets, life and death, emotional and physical support. When I said gosh, it wasn't just in response to that text, but the fact that texts are overwhelmingly in support of the position the midwives have been articulating thus far in the program. Hi John, midwives pay not keeping up. Every time MPs get a pay rise, then midwives, nurses, teachers and so on should get the same percentage pay rise. People who are performing essential services should not be left behind and have to beg for decent wages all the time, says Anna. So what does the Minister say? Because the Dear David is David Clark. Well, he wasn't available for an interview today, but sent us a statement which I will read word for word. Pour yourselves a drink and sit back in a comfy seat, unless you're driving, of course, in which case that would be totally inappropriate. Midwives I've met with and spoken with have reinforced for me what a demanding and incredibly important job they do. We are fortunate to have high-quality midwives in New Zealand. However, there is a global midwife shortage, and that creates workforce challenges for New Zealand. I know many midwives are feeling the pressure and want more support. It is important to note that workforce issues and shortages do not develop overnight, and they do take time to fix. If the previous government had bothered to do proper workforce planning, then we might have avoided seeing the sort of pressures we are now seeing. That from David Clark. He said he has requested Ministry of Health help to look at what can be done to address the situation in both the short and long term. We would love to hear from you. If you are a midwife, or you are expecting a baby, or you have recently used the services of a midwife, you can text us on 2101. Now, David Clark looked back over the previous 9 years and said, what did the previous government do? Fair point, but next week we are going to ask him, what will this government do? We will talk to David Clark about that next week.